The other man. I stood out in the hallway studying the layout of the break room before stepping in. Aside from the ambient noise from the TV mounted in the corner near the ceiling, it was fairly quiet. There was a dozen tables set up throughout the room, but only 3 of them were occupied. The 4 occupants were all women, wearing the EVS beige-colored scrubs designated for our department in the hospital. Toward the front of the room were 2 black women sitting together, whispering to one another. They kept looking toward the back of the room. I followed the eyes of the 2 EVS workers. In the middle was an older Latina woman eating her lunch. At the far corner of the room in the back sat an Asian woman, who appeared to be in her 30s. She looked familiar, so I eyed her for a moment, wondering where I'd seen her before. Interested in finding more about her, I entered the break room. Like a missile locked on its target, I made my way toward the back, strolling past the 2 gossiping women at the front, then the older one wafting down half a gordita, until I was face to face with the woman in the back. She glanced up, and in my green dialect, I said, "Hey, aren't you Hmong? I think I've seen you somewhere before." I pulled the chair out from under her table and plopped myself onto it. "Yes, I am, but I've never seen you," she replied, back in the same dialect. "What is your name?" "Oh, so you're Green. My name's Cliff," I said. "And yours?" "Yes, I'm Green. My name is Mrs. Yinka," she said. "Now that's a really powerful name. Your husband must match it really well." I smiled and looked down at the badge hanging around her neck. It read Pang Fu Yang, with her picture next to it. "Cliff, is that your real name?" "That's not a Hmong name," she said. "Sure it is," I said. I noticed her also staring at my badge. "See? Pang Fu, it says right there." Grinning, I pointed to my name. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair upon hearing her actual name used by another Hmong man, other than her husband or family. She probably thought I was some sort of degenerate, as would most traditional Hmong people. With the tattoos, goatee, and long hair, they weren't totally wrong. "Are you new here? I haven't seen you before," she said, changing the subject. "Yeah, it's my first day. The boss told me you'd be here. He wanted me to shadow you from here on out, so congratulations, I'm your new trainee." Fua sighed. She didn't look delighted by the news. "Oh, come on, Fua, why the face? It won't be that bad. I'm a fast learner. You'll see," I said, smiling. At that moment, her cell phone rang, and she picked up. I leaned back in my chair and couldn't help my eyes from being drawn to the woman. Fua didn't have the type of looks that would turn many heads, but she was easy enough on the eyes. She had a petite frame with long black hair that was tied into a ponytail. Like the rest of the EVS employees, she had on scrubs, but underneath it was a long-sleeve compression shirt. On her face was a dark and brooding expression, as if her life was filled with rain clouds, and she hadn't seen the sun in eternity. This both intrigued and saddened me. Fua blocked part of her face with her free hand when she noticed me staring at her, so I looked away. After about a 5-minute conversation, she hung up and we spent the remainder of our lunch break getting to know one another. I told her about my non-existent relationship with my family due to my troubled past. No surprise, I learned she was indeed married and with 4 kids. I discovered we had a few things in common, like the same model car, for example. Fua seemed like the quintessential Hmong woman. She was traditional, dutiful, and cared deeply for her family. Despite that, she seemed bothered by something in her personal life, though she didn't bring it up. Her body language said a lot about herself. When not speaking, she always seemed deep in thought, as if contemplating on the mysteries of life or something. Though I wanted to know, it wasn't my place to ask. For the next several weeks on the job, I shadowed Fua, and we continued getting to know one another. Weeks turned to months as we worked alongside each other. About half a year went by, and she got more comfortable around me. Before I knew it, we'd formed a really close bond, and she started opening up to me. Being around me built her confidence back up, since I'd always complimented and pushed for her to stand up for herself, especially since she'd get pushed around by her coworkers. We also started hanging out outside of work. As her confidence increased, Fua began putting on makeup and doing her hair. She even started bringing me lunch. I had suspicions she may have grown fond of me, At least I hoped she did, since I had feelings for her. I liked her the moment I saw her at one of the many gatherings. Anyway, the reason for her being drawn to me, as wrong as it may be, since she was a married woman after all, was primarily due to her loneliness. The poor woman didn't have an outlet since her husband forbade her to have any friends nor talk and visit with her family while he was seeing other women. I didn't think much of it at first, but started to notice Fua only wore her compression shirts occasionally, and when she did, she'd wear it for days at a time. One day, as we were finishing preparations for a patient room, I pretended to sweep the floor while I observed Fua washing her hands. She pulled one of her sleeves up to reveal a fist-sized bruise on her forearm. "What happened there?" I asked. Confused, she looked up to see what I was referring to. I pointed and said, "Your arm, what happened?" "Nothing," she said, pulling the sleeve of her shirt down. I fell on the stairs of our house." In a panic, she got water all over her sleeve as Fua frantically rinsed off the rest of the soap from her hands. "How did it happen?" I asked, leaning the broom against the wall as I approached her. "Let me see." "I'm fine, really," she said, hurrying out of the room and drying her hands on the sides of her scrubs. I grabbed her hand. She tried to resist, but I held it firmly. I pulled her sleeve up to her elbow to get a better look at her arm. There was not just one, but multiple bruises. It looked like she must have used her arms to shield herself from being beaten by something, and figured her other arm was just as bad. Fua didn't look at me. It was as if she was disgusted and ashamed of herself. My heart ached, and I felt sick to my stomach. "This doesn't look like you fell on some stairs," I said. "I told you, I'm fine," she yelled. She snatched her arm away from me and ran out of the room. After that day, Fua avoided me, and we didn't speak to each other. My conscience and concern for the woman I cared for kept gnawing at me, to say or do something. Not sure of what else to do, I started following her home after work to make sure she was safe. I parked my car on the side of her house. My plan was to intervene if anything happened. I stood guard for hours until I fell asleep and woke up to the start of the next day. Fua saw me waiting around for her after work one night and confronted me about it. "Stay away from my house," she yelled. "I'm not going to sit around and let you get killed," I shouted back. We had an unproductive back and forth, then she stormed off, with me following her. "Hey, lady, everything okay?" a man called out. We turned to look, and it was the security guard. Fua waved him off, and he stared at her for a moment with a disconcerting look on his face before making his way back to the security booth. I turned my attention back to Fua. "Does anyone else know about this?" She said nothing and kept walking. "I can help," I shouted. "Talk to me." She used the remote to unlock her car from about 20 yards out. I kept trying to convince her that I could help and for her to talk to me, but she wouldn't listen. "Leave me alone. It's none of your business," she exclaimed. As she was about to reach the door of her car, I ran in front to block her from getting inside. "I'm Fua. I love you," I shouted. She stopped in her tracks with a look of surprise. What did you say?" she gasped. I love you, so this makes it my business," I said. "Yeah, I'm only an outsider, but what that man does to you is beyond wrong." "Yeah, you're one to speak. Cliff, you're nothing but a criminal." It has been said that the ones you love the most cut you the deepest. Those words couldn't have been truer. I never thought words could sting as painfully as it did in that moment. Was that really what she thought of me? I tried my best to compose myself. "That man, he doesn't deserve you. If you don't like what I said, you can hate me for it. I'll even leave and you won't ever see me again. But please, leave before it's too late. If nothing I say will convince you, at least think of your children. Who will care for them if you're gone?" Fua's eyes had begun to water at that point. She wiped away her tears, then said, "I've got to go." She stepped around me and got into her car and drove off. After she left, I paced back and forth in the parking lot, contemplating if I should follow her. At first I wasn't going to, but my heart eventually relented. So I got in my car and headed to her house. I parked the car on the side of the house and waited, as I've done for the past several days. I wasn't exactly sure when I'd fallen asleep, but I awoke to shouting and screaming, followed by what sounded like glass shattering. I immediately recognized Four's voice at once. I brought my seat back to its upright position, stepped out of the car, and rushed toward the house, all the while the cacophony of screams, shouts, and cries filled the air. "You whore!" Yinka's voice roared, followed by a series of thuds, a crash, and Four's screams. "The relatives, they said you were putting on makeup while at work. Have you no shame? You're a married woman. You need to behave like one. Why do you keep going out to the car so late at night? Who are you seeing?" I reached the front door, worked the knob, and was surprised it wasn't even locked. It was dark inside except for the light coming from the hallway opposite the living room. Aside from the darkened shape of an overturned bookcase, I couldn't see much else. Glass and other debris crunched underneath the soles of my shoes as I quickly made my way to the illuminated hallway, honing in on the ruckus coming from one of the rooms as Yinka continued to interrogate Four. "Very well. You can take your secrets to the grave. We'll settle this in the afterlife." I found the master bedroom in the last room at the end of the hall. Four was on the floor in a fetal position by the foot of the bed, with Yinka standing over her, and in his hand was a pistol. I bull-rushed the man, and we both fell to the floor. The gun flew out of his hand and skidded out of reach. We both scrambled after it. I got to it first, but before I could fully grip the weapon, he pounced on me. We tussled around the floor for the weapon. It went off with a bang, and a second later, Yinka's body went limp. I crawled out from underneath it to see a bruised and bloody Four on the floor with her back against the far wall. She was in tears and had her arms wrapped around her knees. I went over to help her up, and we embraced while wailing sirens could be heard in the distance. "It's okay. You're going to be okay," I said as I held her tight. "Mommy, what happened?" asked the voice of a little girl. We turned to look, and there were 3 girls standing by the bedroom door, their eyes fixed on the chaotic scene before them. Four quickly ushered them into the other bedroom. There was no need for them to be exposed to the grisly image, especially one involving their father. Four and her girls hugged each other. I stood watching by the doorway as the family had their moment. Four looked up at me. I flashed her a smile and nodded at her. I took off running out the front door before the blue and red strobing lights swept through the living room. During the course of the investigation, Four claimed there was a man named Cliff involved. However, police could find no evidence of this. There was no record of an Asian male named Cliff who worked in the same department as her. Medical analysis show Four also lost her 4th child when she was savagely beaten by her husband.